What Ike Allen and Andy Anderson have created at Avaiya is what the world needs.
Hello, Avaiya family. I'm Brielle Starr, Online Education Coordinator for Avaiya. Avaiya is the creator of over 1,000 books, films, courses, teachings, and other supportive resources. Thank you so much for joining us. Our fellow teacher Alex Greene is with us today to talk about healing trauma through the body, the power of neurogenic tremoring. Alex has intensively studied the connections between the body, breath, nervous system, and the neurogenic tremor reflex. He integrates a study of numerous bodywork and nervous system techniques, and in addition to running a successful group private practice, Alex is an innovative somatic educator. Welcome to Avaiya, Alex.
Thanks so much, Brielle. Happy to be here.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. I am very excited to learn about neurogenic tremoring. I actually know nothing about it.
Perfect.
But before we get into the basics of that, I'd love if you could actually get us started by just telling us a little bit about you and your journey into the work that you do today.
Yeah, well, good. I'll try to be brief. For me personally, what got me into somatic work or mind-body work in general was um, I after college I was did kind of a deep dive into Zen Buddhism and spent several years in practice in residence at a monastery doing with meditation practice, and it was a very physical approach to meditation. The mantra of the school that I belonged to was entering Zen or entering meditation through the body. So there was a very big sort of body embodied focus to self development and meditative kind of practice. And I was so again, it was very physical, both with meditation and with martial arts and physical work and things like that. And at a certain point, I was plagued by some difficulty with a injury, an old injury from my running career in my hip and in my lower back, and it would sometimes really prevent me from finding comfort in long periods of meditation and things like that. So somebody came to do some work on me while I was living at the monastery and took me through what something similar to the 10 session series of structural integration body work. So something in the Ida Rolf lineage of body work, and which is kind of known as a pretty kind of comprehensive, bit of a deep tissue, also sometimes a bit of a painful kind of modality. So I went through this process and I had a really interesting experience somewhere midway through the series of 10. I was going through each session once per week. And excuse me, and the experience I had was that I was laying on my back, and the bodywork therapist was doing some work along my rib cage, kind of freeing up the fascia and connective tissue, working with my breath. And I was laying on my back, and my knees were bent, my feet were flat onto the bodywork table, and then a tremor or vibration started to develop in my legs, and it sort of built up a head of steam, and then ultimately, after a few moments, then there was sort of a very big quaking and tremoring in my legs and hips and pelvis. And I was very surprised by this. It was definitely coming from me. It was a sort of an inside out, very powerful vibration. And I kind of stared wide eyed at my bodywork therapist. I said, "Oh my gosh, what the heck is happening here?" And she just looked completely, nonplussed, like she had seen this before. And she said, "Oh, don't, it's okay. Just, let it go. It's some kind of release." And so that was enough of an explanation for me to relax into the process. And over the course of about the next 10 or 15 minutes, as she continued doing the work in my upper body, my legs and hips went through just a very dynamic process of shaking and vibrating and twisting and turning and doing something. And what was so amazing to me is when it kind of came to its own conclusion 10 or 15 minutes later, and I had a chance to sort of lay flat or then come to standing again. I just felt like something very significant had happened within me. My hips and pelvis felt very different. My legs felt different. My hip pain was very changed and different. I felt there was probably some kind of emotional component and release. It was sort of a big deal, but I didn't have much of an explanation for it. Well, fast forward about maybe 10 years, that experience had been significant enough for me that I thought, wow, there's just a huge power in working through the body, both for physical things like what had brought me to the work, but as I learned more, also for sort of psycho-emotional and trauma-related things as well. And so I became a practitioner of structural integration bodywork. That was my original therapeutic training. And in doing that work, I would sometimes see that a similar thing happened, where somebody would have a big spontaneous vibration and tremor, and it was always positive. It always signaled something important happening and letting, but I still didn't have a very good explanation. And I didn't know very much about the nervous system at that time. And so, as luck would have it, eventually, somebody that I was trading work with said, you need to learn about this thing called TRE, this thing about neurogenic tremoring. These words meant nothing to me. The acronym TRE meant nothing to me. But I agreed to go through a session. So she guided me through a process, and we'll talk about that in our conversation here today. She guided me through a process of some movements and some breath work that duplicated this shaking, tremoring experience. And again, it lasted for about 10 or 15 minutes. And I was so excited because now I realized that there not only did somebody else know about this sort of mysterious phenomenon that I had seen, but they also somebody had studied it. Someone knew what it was neurobiologically. Somebody had created a whole modality of therapeutic work around it. So it was like a huge connection. So and that person was Dr. David Briselli, who we can talk a little bit about here. So I ordered his books, and he was coming into Madison, Wisconsin, where I was living at that time. A month or so later, so I was able to start the certification program to become a TRE provider and learn about the neurogenic tremor response. So that was what led me into it, and it just unlocked a lot of things for me. In the 10 years since that time, or 11 years now, I think tremoring has just become a focal point for a lot of the work that I do, and so I'm sure we'll cover some of that in our conversation today. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
so interesting. Thank you for sharing about your journey. And yeah, it was really fascinating to hear about how you didn't know what was happening. I could see that being a little bit frightening. Like, what is
Right.
happening here? So yeah, let's recap. I know you touched on it a bit, but could you tell us more in depth about what neurogenic tremoring is and how it works?
Absolutely. So neurogenic tremoring, most people would have some familiarity with it, even if something hasn't happened to you, like I was describing for me in the body work. Most people have had experiences where they've gotten shaky or trembly, or they've seen that in somebody else. And so, really common examples would be if you were like a little bit nervous about something, giving a talk or something, you might get a little shaky, or your voice might get a little bit shaky. Or if something very surprising or shocking happens, sometimes that's accidents. You fall off your bike and physically you're okay, but you're shaken up, and then afterwards your leg quivers or your body is trembling. Many people would have had that experience, or a surprising emotional experience happens, and not necessarily only shocking in a bad way. Sometimes people shaking with joy and excitement. So it can come up in different contexts, or maybe we've observed it in animals. Dogs shaking during a thunderstorm is a common example, or medical settings for humans. So many times coming out of anesthesia, people will go through a shaking process. After childbirth, a really common example when mothers will have had a spontaneous experience of neurogenic tremoring. So lots of us have had this happen. And what it turns out to be is that process of getting shaky during a scary thing, or a shocking thing, or where there's a lot of energy to it, um, it's not just a random side effect of excitement or excessive hormones within our body. As it turns out, when we look at it more carefully from a biological lens, or stress management lens, that feature, the reason that the human body and other mammals exhibit that behavior of shaking, is as a natural downregulation method. It's a way of taking a nervous system that has revved up and helping it come back down into homeostasis or equilibrium. And so it has a function. in the biologically and evolutionarily, and that function is to bring us into calmer states. Now, the innovation of neurogenic tremoring as a modality is that we don't have to just wait for this to happen randomly, kind of like I had to just wait till I was the whatever stars aligned on the bodywork table that it happened all by itself. That the real insight of Dr. David Briselli was that there could be a way to intentionally access this tremor response, not in the context of stress and shock, but in a context in an environment of safety and relaxation. And in that environment of safety and relaxation, accessing the same reflex can lead to a significant downregulation at the body, mind, and nervous system level. So that is a quick explanation as to what this modality is all about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, awesome explanation of this modality. And it's great to have a better understanding of what it is and how, yeah, the different ways in which people might experience it without even recognizing that that's what it is. And I know that you talk a lot about healing trauma through the body. Of course, neurogenic tremoring relates to that. Could you tell us about why it's so important to involve the body in the healing process rather than just relying on something like traditional talk therapy?
Absolutely. Really great question. So, traditional talk therapies are fantastic, and there is so much that we have learned through cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy and modalities like this. But about and I don't I'll get the date wrong, but it's maybe been about 10 or 12 years since Bessel van der Kolk's really um, impactful book, The Body Keeps the Score, was published, and it's been on the within the top 10 of the bestseller list for just months and months. I think it has some records for how long it has stayed within the bestseller category. So many listeners, I think, will have heard of that book, The Body Keeps the Score, and it's Bessel van der Kolk and some other trauma therapists who have really paved the way for demonstrating that post-traumatic stress disorder and stress and trauma, nervous system based, the effects of trauma are very much involve not so much exclusively the thinking levels of the brain, or what we would sometimes call the neocortex or the outer layers of the brain, but that some of the change that has happened, what we would call the imprint of trauma, is more likely to be in the subcortical region, so the limbic brain or the brainstem brain, affecting things like our heart rate and our digestive system and our sleep and all these sort of autonomic functions. And so a whole class of modalities have emerged around treating and working with trauma and stress using the body as its access point. And so those are what we would now call bottom up modalities. Bottom up means we're working from the body. We're still trying to influence the whole person, including the brain and their psychological experience, but we're doing it through a neurological access point. So some of the common bottom up modalities, yoga certainly has been studied. Yoga and breath work is a common bottom up approach, and other somatic psychotherapies like somatic experiencing. That's Peter Levine's work. EMDR works with the eyes to access the subcortical brain spotting similarly. And so these are a whole class of what we call somatic therapies that are trying to help a person recover from the effects of trauma by working through the nervous system and through the body. Certain kinds of body touch therapies and massage therapy would also be considered bottom-up therapies in the same way. And neurogenic tremoring is a very particular example. And actually, something that I'm so interested in is that tremoring, although in TRE, that's the name, TRE stands for tension and trauma releasing exercises, that's the primary modality that teaches how to work with the neurogenic tremor response. But what I'm so interested in is that tremoring shows up also in some of these other modalities. When people do yoga, they'll sometimes have a tremoring experience, like had happened to me in body work. When people do EMDR or brain spotting or somatic experiencing, very common to have tremoring as part of what they would call a discharge process uh, during a sort of a trauma therapy course of treatment. So, one of the things that I'm so interested in these days is exploring the particular influence of tremoring and how it shows up in some of these other modalities, and trying to get help develop more awareness and insight on how to use it effectively within trauma and stress-based treatments.
Mhm. Yeah, really, once again, just so fascinating to hear about that. And I think it's so common for so many of us to be wrapped up in our heads when it comes to healing and forget about our body or ignore our body or not listen to our body, all of those different sorts of things.
Right.
And yeah, you just mentioned that idea of fitting neurogenic tremoring into other healing modalities. Is there anything else you could tell us about that, like how it could complement things like therapy and meditation or breath work?
Oh, yeah, really great question. Yeah, one of the really unique and empowering things about neurogenic tremoring is, so a person can learn it. They can learn it on their own through, say, watching an instructional video. They can learn it in a workshop or a one-on-one session. So somebody can learn how to safely initiate or to work, just to turn on this reflex, the tremoring reflex, and then also how to work with it in a way that's not overwhelming, that feels, safe, and it not doing too much all at once. That those Some of these principles of self-regulation are very important to working with it in a effective way. But the empowering thing about tremoring is, once somebody learns how to initiate the response and feels safe with it and feels self-regulated with the process, now it becomes what for many people become a lifelong nervous system management tool. So, there's people who totally on their own build it into their daily, weekly rhythm, or they can tell when they really need the down regulations. They've had a particularly overwhelming day or week or an experience, and now they know about this and they can work with it effectively to bring themselves back into baseline and homeostasis and release any anxiety and things like that. But so, because people can learn to use it on their own, one way that it integrates really successfully with other therapy modalities, whether that's body work, breath work, meditation, psychotherapy, is what I have seen is that if somebody develops a tremoring practice and has some consistency to it, say, for example, they're doing it 2 or 3 times per week without overdoing anything. For many people, I consider it kind of like an accelerant, that the progress that we would make, I see this as a structural integration bodywork therapist, the progress that we make is faster because their nervous system is more involved. They're more likely to create changes at the body and the nervous system level because they're working with this practice from the inside out. I sort of think of tremoring as something that's happening from within, and then some therapies are kind of where a facilitator is helping from the outside, either working physically with the myofascia or the muscles, or working with even in psychotherapy, the kinds of prompts and questions are inviting somebody to reflect on something that's a little bit of an outside in stimulation to the person. So my experience is that by giving somebody an inside out tool like neurogenic tremoring, it makes them more receptive to other somatic modalities. So that would be a quick explanation. I'll just share briefly, as a bodywork therapist, having again, we could just wait for tremoring to emerge all by itself, and there's power in doing that. But there's times when you can, as a bodywork therapist, you can sort of sense that there's a tension pattern or a breath restriction pattern that isn't really changing. And so, quite fluidly, we can, once somebody knows how to turn on this reflex, quite fluidly, we can activate it right there within the bodywork session. Now neurogenic tremoring is happening, and some of the same physical techniques, let's say we're working to open up the rib cage or the diaphragm, we can still work with those physical techniques, but now we have the nervous system involved, and the interaction between that person's tremoring process and then the hands of the bodywork therapist can often lead to faster results. That's one example of and then the last one I'll mention as an integration would be in meditation context. I mentioned at the very beginning, having a background in Zen meditation. That's still something that I participate in. And something that I have seen working with groups of beginners, people who are just learning meditation, oftentimes in, say, like a 2 or 3 day intensive retreat type of format. Um, where if we do tremoring 2 or 3 times, like let's say in the evenings of the program, what we have seen in those experiences is that people can more quickly calm, like the sort of the kind of mental chatter that's, in some ways the enemy of meditation is sort of our monkey mind and excessive thinking. What we have observed is that when we add in tremoring sessions within these meditation retreats, it just really helps people calm their brains, and get closer to the kind of meditation experience that we're looking for in that setting. So that's just another example of where it can fit in very successfully.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you for sharing about the way that it fits in and works together with other modalities. That's always so interesting to learn about, especially what you just mentioned about the meditation. I find that one super fun and interesting to hear about. And I feel like it sounds like from what you're sharing that really anyone can benefit from neurogenic tremoring. Is that the case, or does it work best only for people who have really intense trauma or some specific, quite chronic pain or something like that?
I'm so glad you asked that question, Brielle. Such a good question. No, it is relevant for everybody. That would be my statement. So the origins of it, we did not go a lot into the origins here today in this conversation, but the origins of the work really were in high trauma settings. So Dr. David Briselli, who developed this, was working in conflict areas, war zones, and natural disaster relief. And so he actually really did develop this in kind of a very acute stress and trauma environment. And so that is its origins. That being said, in the 20 or so years that it's now been being used globally in different settings, what we're seeing now is a broadening of the use. So it's still really, really wonderful for trauma and both for individuals and working with groups, which is what he did a lot of. It's still really, really applicable there, but we see it as much more broadly applicable than that. It's good just for not necessarily trauma, but any kind of nervous system dysregulation. A really common example would be, sleep dysregulation, or we see it showing very positive effects with actually like long COVID is an example. I guess that is a chronic illness, but there's a nervous system component to long COVID that can be positively benefited by somatic practices like tremoring. But also meditation communities, yoga communities, we're seeing it more as some people find that it really helps them access things like creativity. For some people, it helps them they get deeper into what they might consider a spiritual connection or a connection with their authenticity. So we're seeing that kind of an application. It's also becoming really popular in some athletic communities, where, again, not so much stress and trauma, but athletes are increasingly recognizing that athletics has a demand on the nervous system, and that as part of recovery and supporting the parasympathetic nervous system, tremoring can be really beneficial. We just completed about a year of training a group of men and women at the New York Fire Department, FDNY, part of the fitness training staff there, and they kind of really took to TRE and tremoring as being very effective for their community, both because of the stress and the demands being of firefighters, but also, again, within their fitness context. So they're now teaching it to the new probationary officers and using it that way. So just as it kind of gives the idea that yeah, tremoring, it's definitely not only about stress and trauma. It's kind of about sort of human wellness in general, I would say.
Hmm. Yeah, I love hearing that. I think it's great when something can be so widespread and help so many people depending on what they're dealing with, whether, yeah, it be sports or stress or tension or trauma, all the different things that it can relate to. And so it sounds like a very um, expansive modality. And with you sharing about some of those things like creativity and all those different aspects, do you find with the people that you've worked with, there are some common outcomes? Like, do people tend to express some common things that they are feeling after working with someone such as yourself? Are there any common thoughts or patterns there?
Yeah, very. That is also a really good question. Yeah, let's see. Some of the common things I would hear would be, "Wow, my brain just turned off" in a positive way. So, like kind of like what I shared with the meditation group. People would use the word grounded. I feel grounded. They often mean that physically, like they might feel sort of more in their body in a positive sense, or a bit more solid or weighty, but again in a positive sense. Um, uh, Words like calm, peace. But another one that I really like to hear is connected. People they say, I feel connected not only to myself, but I'm able to be in connection with others. So we'll hear that with when we work with vets or people who with maybe PTSD, or even some of the firefighters were expressing this, that they know when they are in high stress arousal, it's hard for them to connect with family and friends when they're in their sort of PTSD responses. And so when they are able to come out of that, what stands out to them is how easily they're able to connect with their loved ones, with their family members. And in another conversation, we can talk about that theme of connection, because bottom up therapies, we talk about what's called the social engagement nervous system. This comes from polyvagal theory, but it's this idea that when we can support the safety parts of our nervous system, it actually makes us much more available for connection to ourselves and others. So that's a theme that really comes through a lot with people who practice.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing about some of those. It's wonderful to hear about all the different benefits and ways that people are growing and expanding and feeling a lot better. And I love that connection piece. That's so important, especially in today's world where we're so frequently disconnected from ourselves and our loved ones, scrolling on our phones, all of those sorts of things. So yes, I love that. And I think it's time we talk a little bit about how people can dive deeper with you. For anyone who's interested, I know you have a great free gift today, which is 1 month of your Neurogenic Integration class membership. And then we also have your Neurogenic Integration Foundations course. And there are buttons leading over to both of those options below if you'd like to tell us about what they entail.
Yeah, great. The Neurogenic Integrations membership, so that's a website platform where we do weekly online classes in neurogenic tremoring, several classes per week. And some of those are introductory level, and some of those are for people already tremoring. And we also host some workshops and things like that. So the free month's membership is an invitation to join us online for some of our programming and do some shaking with us. The Neurogenic Integration Foundations course is a video course that I developed with my colleague Siv Yosang Shields, and it is a fairly brief, perhaps about an hour to an hour and a half chapter-based video course that really just teaches the basics of how to get started safely with the neurogenic tremoring practice. So it gives some of the background information, some of the caveats, how to approach it sort of responsibly, and then a detailed description of how to work with it, and then full length sessions guiding you through the process, and then some information about how to kind of continue to develop or personalize a practice. So we consider that a very good starting point for somebody who's wanting to learn about neurogenic tremoring, discover it in themselves, and then see if it's sort of right for them. So yeah, those two offerings, and happy to share with the Avaiya community.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for creating and offering both of those lovely resources. And as a reminder to everyone watching and or listening, you can click the buttons below and head over to Alex's website to check that out. And then are there any final insights that you'd like to share before we wrap up, Alex?
Final insights. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to paraphrase my colleague Steve, who I mentioned, who developed that course with, and she likes to say that she thinks of tremoring as as a biological natural resource, or sort of like in the same way that breathing is our birthright and movement is our birthright. We believe that knowing about your ability to tremor, not out of fear, not out of stress, but the positive effects from letting go into this reflex, is similarly a part of our birthright in our deep evolutionary history. And so we want people to know about it and develop a positive relationship with that. It can be very, very transformative and life changing for many. So we hope this helps a lot of people get started with it.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that last message. And thank you for being here with us today at Avaiya and teaching us all about neurogenic tremoring. It was so lovely speaking with you.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, Brielle.
Absolutely. And I also want to thank our Avaiya students for joining us today. And we will see you all again real soon. Take care, everyone.
Avaiya has changed my life.
Avaiya has made me the woman I am today.
Avaiya is my home.
Avaiya is personal freedom.
Avaiya is the reason my life continuously improves.
Let everyone in your life know about Avaiya.
Everyone needs to know about this amazing company.
Thank you, Avaiya, for appearing in my inbox.
What Ike Allen and Andy Anderson have created at Avaiya is what the world needs.